about how to hire a great VP of engineering. Before I pass it off to our speakers, I'm just going to go over a few quick housekeeping tips. So thank you all so much for joining. Quang and Cathy are going to be talking for about 20 minutes. They'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of their session. So please make sure to have your questions ready. You can either drop them in the time throughout the session. They'll make sure to address those when the time comes, or when we open it up, you can feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself and jump right in. You can also use the raise hand function and we'll be sure to call you out there. Just a reminder that all the sessions are being recorded and they all will be shared on the SaaStr YouTube page after. I think that covers it as far as housekeeping stuff goes. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Quang of Plato and Cathy of Shopify. We'll let you two take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Quang. I'm co-founder and CEO of Plato. I'll introduce myself in 30 seconds and let Cathy introduce herself too. So in terms of what is Plato, we are a startup. We are backed by the SaaStr Fund, the great Jason Duncan, and other great engineering leaders. Our mission is to help engineers, founders, CTOs to become great leaders. We help them develop their soft skills, develop their leadership skills and everything, thanks to mentorship, thanks to a community of the greatest engineering leaders in this planet, including Cathy. Cathy is one of the best engineering leaders I know, and I asked her to join me to talk to you about this great challenge, this great topic on how to hire a great VP of engineering. Cathy?
You are too kind. Thank you. It's great to be here with you, and I love the mission of what you're working on. So my name is Cathy, and I'm VP of Engineering at Shopify. Before that, I was the CTO at Stitchfix, and I've done a lot of hiring of engineering leaders across the companies that I've worked, Salesforce before that, and many others. I'm also on the board of a small tech company and helped them hire their head of engineering, and was on the interview loop of that. And so, just have seen interview processes across different industries, sizes, scale, and excited about talking about this topic because it's an important one.
Awesome. The format that we wanted to have today is basically, I can share, I've been talking to a lot of the greatest VPs of engineering and CEOs and founders, and I've been asking them about what are your greatest tips on how to hire great VPs of engineering. So I can summarize those tips in 3 steps and a couple of advice. It's gonna take 5 minutes, and hopefully after that, we can discuss with Cathy about if those advice are actually relevant, if she has been experiencing some stories illustrating those advice or not in her long career. So I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion with Cathy. And hopefully for the next 10, maybe 12 minutes, 15 minutes, we are going to be able to take on your questions. So let me start with what I learned from talking to the greatest VPs of engineering and about their process and about how they've been hired in their companies. So it actually comes down to 3 steps when you are looking to hire a VP of engineering. So the first step is to know what you want. The second step is to run a process. And the third step is to make a lonely decision. What does it mean? So basically, when you are looking for any hire actually, but even more important for a VP of engineering, it's important to know what you want and to understand that you are going to hire someone hopefully for the next 18 months. Less than that is going to be probably too short. It might not be enough, but longer than that, you might find someone that is going to be able to help you on your next stage of your startup, but potentially not actually and now. So it's important to fill in the gap for the next 18 months, and that is the advice that I heard from the leaders interview. The second advice is to actually understand what does a VP of engineering does in general, but in your company, in your stage, in your context, what is really important for you at a given point. So you might be the CEO of a company, you might be very technical or not technical at all. You might be very good in execution or very good in hiring, and you have to find a VP of engineering that is actually to either take on what you are really good at that you want to delegate, or either have and complement your skill set. So that is a survey of what we saw from the VPs of engineering in the community. What do they do in an early stage configuration and a later stage configuration? It doesn't really matter like what are what is actually appearing the most. What is really interesting and important is to understand what you are looking for. And the third advice is to look at what are your 3 must-have. Try not to find a jack of all trades that is really good at everything. Try to find like what are the 3 most important things that you are not going to make any compromise, and try to look for those 3 must-have hiring criteria. So those are for the step number 1, to know what you want. The step number 2 is to run a process. And running a process, there are plenty of things that you must do great, but the 3 advice that I heard from the founders that I found very relevant is 1, set the bar, solve real life problems, and do all type of reference check. So what does it mean? In terms of setting the bar, the best advice I can give you is to actually meet as many of the greatest in VP of engineering that you can. Even though they are not looking for a job, it doesn't matter. It's just to actually understand what is the bar of a great VP of engineering. The more you can meet, ask your investors, ask your advisors, ask your board member. It's super important that you meet the best out there so that you can actually set the bar of what is great, and then you can define how is the bar at your company at a given stage. The second advice I've heard a lot is to solve real life problems in a real life context during the interview. So try to think about the challenge that you are having right now, or your CTO, your engineering leaders, and your engineering team are facing right now, and try to discuss with the candidates how they would solve that problem. And what is interesting is, if you're having like a 30-minute discussion that's really formal, it's not the same thing as you have like 5 hours discussion with follow-ups or whatever. If you already start with that candidate and you actually beginning to solve real life problems, it's really a good sign. So try to solve real life problems. It's interesting. I know Cathy has told me a story about that when she hired for a VP of engineering at Stitchfix. We're going to discuss about this story later, but I feel it's really important to try to make it real. And the third point about the process that I wanted to share today is to really do all type of reference checks. So reference check is actually obviously very important, but do 2 types of reference check. The first type of reference check is a front door reference check, meaning the list of people that the candidate actually gives you. And the second type of reference check is the backdoor reference check. And the backdoor reference check are as important than the front door. But they all have different meaning, different motivation, and different goal. The front door reference check is basically they are going obviously to tell you the candidate is great. That is kind of obvious, but you have to find if the things and the strengths that they're telling you is actually matching the must-have criteria that we discussed earlier, right? So it's just a matching of the great and the strength. The backdoor reference check is actually 2 things about the strengths and the weaknesses, because they don't really have an interest to tell you that the candidate was great. They might be a bit more transparent. And the final step is to make a decision, but it's actually really hard to make a decision and to make this decision when you are a CEO or maybe the CTO for a later stage company, when you had like maybe 8, 5, 10 people involved in the process, you know? So it's really interesting and important to step back and to think about that this decision is not going to be a consensus. It's not going to be a democratic with votes or whatever. It's going to be very important that you take the responsibility to take this decision. And if you are not going to have a candidate that will 100% please to everyone, that is going to be very rare. So it's going to be very important that you go in your own thoughts, go in your own room and think about it and take this decision. So those are the advice, the advice that we heard from the greatest CEOs and VPs of engineering that have been interviewing and have been hearing from. And I'd love to hear from you, Cathy, about if any of those resonates with your experience when you've been hiring VPs of engineering, or when you have been hired as a VP of engineering, for example, recently at Shopify.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of them did. And so excited to jump in and talk more about this. Yeah, I'd say, yeah, I can start wherever though. Do you have a sense on which one?
In terms of, let's start with the step one, and know what you want.
Yeah.
You told me you've been interviewing hundreds of people to hire a great VP of engineering at Stitchfix.
Yeah,
actually,
it felt
does it
like
mean
that.
that you didn't know?
Yeah,
it sounds crazy to me, but yeah, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I did have an opening there for a long time. And I think that this was really the big problem, is that we hadn't gotten together with a group. I hadn't really crystallized in my mind how I was going to make the decision. And we had some missteps where we got really far into the process and realized that that folks on the interview loop were looking at the role in different ways. And one thing that we did there was we got together a partnership pact, which was a little bit of a hokey way of saying that we just all got in a room and really talked about what was necessary to be successful in the role. When we restarted the process, it just was much smoother because everybody was focused on the same success criteria. And so I think just being very explicit about that, and then tying that to like, how are you going to test for that skill set? What are the questions that you're going to ask in the interview loop that's going to really refer back to us knowing if they're going to be good at that requirement.
So you were actually learning during the process what you were actually looking for.
Yeah, I would say that if you go through the process and you're really, it feels like it's lagging, it's a good time to take a step back and see like, okay, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And that learning really helped us as we kicked off another search with an outside firm and really made us very clear about what we were looking for.
Okay, so the later candidates have been actually in a more rigorous process than the earlier candidates.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it was more rigorous. I would say it was clearer. We were very rigorous in how we were asking them, almost too rigorous. We were looking for a perfect unicorn, I would say, and that's a really impossible thing to hire for. And so I think that is, important is that don't throw in everything onto that job requirement to the point that you're looking for a person that doesn't exist.
Have you? So one of the things that is actually a mistake that I always made is to have a longer list than a shorter one, to be more focused on a list of maybe 3, 4, 5 must-haves. Is it something also that you've been nailing down a little bit down the?
I think so. I mean, I'd say engineering leaders are really hard to hire. You are expecting a lot from them. You want them to be strategic, but you want them to really be very detail oriented, and you want them to have both technical skills as well as people skills. They have to be strategic and execution focused. And so those things, and you need someone who's going to have credibility with the technical team, but then also be able to talk to non-technical people. And so already it is a harder job, I would say, especially if you're a non-technical person and you're hiring a head of engineering. Like, how do you get the credibility in those areas? But I think that what technical might mean for you might be different than another company. And so earlier stage, like technical should mean that they can write code and should write code, but that might not be the same thing at a later stage. Maybe it's not absolutely critical that you put them in front of your board right now. Maybe it's something that they can grow into. And so just trying to figure out what are the things that you absolutely need and what are the things that you're willing to be flexible on, and paring that list down so that you're not looking for this laundry list of things. Yeah,
focusing on a smaller number of strengths is actually one of the things that is interesting. I was talking about the process, right? And we're super lucky that you've been hired at Shopify. Congratulations! Less than a month ago. So how was the process? Tell us a bit more about what do you like
Yeah.
about the process? How was the process? How long was it? How many interviews did you do? Tell us a
Yeah.
bit more about a real life example.
Yeah. Well, first off, I was interviewing during the pandemic, which was already new for me. And I was surprised by how normal it felt. Just as we're having this conversation, we, can see each other face to face, look each other in the eye. And I think you get used to the technology pretty fast. And so I felt like the mission of the company, the culture of the company was really coming through, even though we were over Zoom. And that was very reassuring and good. One of the unique things about Shopify that we do is called a life story. And we talk, it's actually run through the talent team. And we drill into their path from in their career for how they started and got to where they are today. And what it's really drilling into is a lot of the values that we find are really important at Shopify. So self-awareness, trust, engagement, impact. I think that that's really important for us to know the type of company that we are and, the values that we have. Shopify is not a Silicon Valley company, and it doesn't run like a typical Silicon Valley company. And not everyone who has been successful at companies here, I am the Valley, will necessarily be successful at Shopify. And so a lot of it is really figuring out folks that will be successful, although not focusing on culture fit, but really focusing on culture add and the key characteristics that are going to be important to have high impact here.
Got it. So you said they succeeded to make it natural, although it was remote. Did you remember any tricks, any tips, anything they did that was actually helping to make this process smoother and natural, although it was through video and during the pandemic?
I think just making sure that when you start, you open up the conversation and make it, as personal as you can without going into the aspects of someone's background that you don't want to do any discrimination against. And so not just jumping into the interview, but helping people feel comfortable, connecting to them, asking how they're doing, and some of that chit-chatting that I think you just take for granted as you're walking into an interview loop, you just have to make space for. And I think that really helps set the tone so that people are going to be at their best in the interview.
Cool. How long was the process? And do you remember how many interviews did you do? What type of interview did you like? That could be helpful for other founders in this room.
Yeah, I'd say it was a pretty typical experience where I was meeting with people from different functions and, across the technology organization. It was nice because they paced it on my interest, and they let me set the pace, I would say. So rather than having a full day of interviews, I sprinkled them out throughout the weeks. That also helped me get to know the company, do my own research, get to really get a feel for the place. And so I think it is interesting that doing this over video conference, you can bundle them up into one full day and really do it fast, or you can space it out. It doesn't necessarily have to be the back-to-back interviews because no one's traveling to the office.
Yeah, so making sure it's actually fitting what you are comfortable with and what you really wanted to do at the time, and making it your own pace. It's actually interesting. Maybe the story about how did you hire your VP of engineering at Stitchfix? The story that you told me about the factory was actually interesting. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, I think solving real problems is a really good piece of advice. I have two stories, but I'll start with the fulfillment center. So Stitchfix is a physical goods product. Like we're Stitchfix is an online personal styling company that helps people discover clothes, and it ships them to their house. They try it on at home, they keep what they like and send back the rest. I keep saying we, but they, because I was my last job, They have fulfillment centers all around the country. And so one of the things that I did to help recruit people in was to take them to the fulfillment center in South San Francisco. So you could see the product, you could see the process, you could actually pick some boxes that got shipped to the customers. And I started doing this for just a recruiting sense for folks to really understand the magnitude and the scale at which Stitchfix operated. What I found out through the process is this was a really good filter for me to really understand the folks that would be successful at Stitchfix. You could see the type of people who would light up in the warehouse that really could connect the dots by, what was happening digitally and what was happening physically. And the questions that they would ask, the efficiencies that they would point out, just really were at a different scale than some folks that, kind of, walked around and, did the job. What I found was that Stitchfix was a very operational heavy company. There's just so many things that were related to the supply chain and the things that you would expect to be a small change actually had a second or third order impact. And so the people who really could get that and were interested in that operational mindset were the folks that I think were most successful at the company. And so I think trying to figure out things like that both will get people excited that you want to get excited, but also will be a flag for you if you're not seeing that level of engagement, that maybe they're not the right fit for the problem space that you're in.
Exactly. VP of engineering at Stitchfix might be different job than VP of engineering anywhere else. So try to make it as real as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
At Salesforce or Shopify.
Right.
That's interesting. We might want to switch to questions.
Yeah.
So Taylor,
I do have another story on the real world side. If we don't see questions coming up, but we can bounce back and forth between audience questions and other stories.
Yeah. Quang, it looks like you guys have one question in the chat from Sohail. It says, if you hire a VP of engineering who later realized wasn't a good fit, how would you go about handling the situation? Do you wait for signs of improvement or immediately let them go and start hiring again? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I think one thing that's really important to note is when you hire a VP of engineering, your job's not done with the hire. And really, even if you are a non-technical founder or CEO, that you should stay engaged with what's going on in the team and also give feedback to the VP of engineer that you hire. And I think this is something that hopefully you're getting some early warning signings and feedback by doing skip level one-on-ones with the team and really helping support their onboarding and development. Because I'd say that each company is really different, and you want to make sure that they can both effectively work with the leadership team, but also within their own team. And I'd say that the greatest CEOs I've worked are able to give feedback and add value, even if they're not an expert in the specific function. And so asking critical questions, staying close to what's happening, especially on the onboarding, so that you can give that early feedback, I think can help make sure that that you can help them have the highest degree of chance of success. But sometimes you're going to make wrong hiring decisions. And I'd say identifying that early is really important. I'd say it does. The one piece of feedback I have on yours that I don't completely agree with is 18 months. I kind of get that you don't want to hire someone for something way beyond where you are, but it takes a long time to hire a leader in the technology space. And so 18 months seems a little fast to me. So I think figuring out ways that you can keep, candidate flow going, if you see things are not working while you're giving them feedback and try to work on improvement, can be really helpful.
I might be biased by the stage of the company. The earlier you are, and maybe the higher growth you are, obviously is going to shorten this period of time. But
yeah,
it's a good point.
makes sense.
Do you want to take another questions, or do we want to go to the second story?
Well, let me jump into the second story, and then if there's other questions, feel free. So the other thing that we did was we did a project interview, and this is for every role at Stitchfix, where we give you a real world problem and you present a project to a team. And these are folks that you're going to be working with day to day. And so like you had suggested, it is a problem that's similar to something that we were working on. And I think it was more realistic than a lot of the interviews that are one-on-one, because we all work in teams. We're never working by ourselves. It's all, how do you, work in a group setting? And so that project interview, you would see how they worked in a group, let them lead the meeting, bring a presentation that they had thought of in advance. I'd say early on in the company, I didn't quite get the interview process, and I did have some problems where people would say like, well, they said this, and that's not how we do things here, or they